Hello and welcome to Yerushalmi Berachos Daf Chaf Beis, and it was about her print. I'm really excited to talk about today. There's so many different ideas. I dive into Hashem that I have siyata d'shmaya to get it out properly, and I would love to hear from you, your ha'aras as well. I'm going to talk about Michal bas Shaul, or a different name, and the Ishto Shel Yonah, the wife of Yonah. So the Gemara at the bottom of Chaf Aleph is talking about these two women. So one of them was Michal bas Shaul, but the Gemara doesn't call her that. It calls her Michal bas Kushi. Haisa loveshes tefillin. She would wear tefillin. Obviously, we know Kushi refers to Shaul, which we'll get to in a second. And then the Gemara says, "V'isho shel Yonah haisa ola regalim," and the wife of Yonah was ola regel. Okay, v'lo michu b'yadam chachamim, and they didn't protest. Okay, so I just want to point out that the Bavli obviously brings this down as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I also want to say that the Gemara says explicitly that perhaps there was protest against both of them. So meaning nobody should gather any halacha l'maisa out of this, but obviously both of these people had objections to, and I'll leave that for the Magid Yashir to explain a little bit more, etc., etc., etc. And there's a tremendous amount to say about this, whether they're allowed to put it on, they're not allowed to, etc. So I want to talk about the kind of the agadic parts of understanding it. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things. Let's talk about the wife of Yonah first, because that one's easiest. So, and again, like I said, there's a parallel Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Sadi Vavam and Aleph. Okay, so the Gemara says that that Yonah's wife would go up to be Ola Regel, obviously L'chora with him. So L'gesh Laden, what does this mean? So is it before he went into the fish or after? And why specifically her out of all the women? That what was her draw? Obviously, it has to do with the story. So, if you want to say it was afterwards, it's pretty easy to understand because obviously she was nispal by what happened to her husband, so she felt a closer connection to Hashem, or maybe there was a psychological part. Again, I don't want you to accuse me of psychoanalyzing. There's a beautiful Zohar. The Zohar says al tigubim shichai v'miyai al tareu, which simply means don't. Hashem is saying keep your don't hurt my anointed ones and my prophets. Al tareu, don't do bad to them. But the Zohar says regarding my neviim al tareu, don't be their friend. Don't think you're on the same level as them. So chas v'shalom, we're not trying to we're trying to bring ourselves up to understand. I'm not trying to bring anybody down to my level. But I just want to say a couple of R's. Okay. So and the Ben Yonah brings us down a few times. Like that's a very important yesod. All right, so perhaps there was some element that she had lost her husband, and so there was a certain connection. But I want to say another thing. It says that the Beis HaShoeva, the Yerushalmi actually says, and Tosas brings us down in Sukkah, that's where Yonah got inspired to become a Navi, because you need Simcha, you need Simcha in order to be connected. And so it could be that the fact that she went up to be Ola Regel with him added to the Simcha as well, that his wife was there as well, because there was Ishto Ubeso, and that also helped inspire the Simcha that was part of his life. Just what to think about. Also, when Yonah's running away from Hashem, it represents a disconnection between Klal Yisrael and someone's wife who's with them. That represents a connection between man and wife, which is Shechina Beinam. So just some things to think about as to why maybe she made this choice to go. Let's talk about Michal bas Kushi. So the pasuk in Tehillim, Parak Zion, David Melech calls Shaul ben Kush, the Ben Yamini, which was the one from Shev Binyamin. They were called Binyaminites. So, and the Gemara explains in Eruvin, the way Rashi explains it, at least, and also based on the Gemara in Moed Katan, the Bavli, on Yud Zayin, where is it? Tes Zayin and Beis. So it says, just like a Kushi, which is a dark person, Ethiopian, is distinguishable by the color of their skin, so too Shaul was distinguishable from other men by his good deeds. So I'm trying to give a shot that why is he specifically being called this name, Michal bas Kushi, in this specific arena, when what does that have to do with the tefillin? So I got this yesod basically mostly from Rav Tzadok. Rav Tzadok was born in 1823 and he died in 1900, and his farm were, I would say, not really so learned, and Rav Dessler brought them back into circulation. And he was a Hasidic Rebbe who had started off as Misnaged, and he learned under Rav Leibel Eger, who was also a Hasidic Rebbe after moving away from his Nagdus of his father, Yerushalmi Eger, and his grandfather, Rekiv Eger. And I've said many stories about him in the past, and they're interesting. But for now, let's just stay focused over here. Okay, so just the element of Michal wearing tefillin, there's a certain standing out, just like the Kushi is standing out, that just like Shaul was an outstanding person, so there's an element of outstandingness in this act in itself. And again, I'm not endorsing and saying that a person should do it. So just let's put together a few things. So first of all, Ritzadik writes that maybe one of the reasons that women are patur from wearing tefillin is obviously mitzvah seishes malagrama, but is it really? Because you could do it any time during the day, etc. But he basically explains that the pshat is because men are stubborn, and therefore they need to break their kishus orif. And since women are not stubborn, therefore they automatically have a connection to Hashem. They don't need the tefillin to break that. Which, remember, we were talking about yesterday, the os of Shabbos, which is one pshat. Could be that women already are living with that os with them. They don't even need a bris. They don't obviously it's not physically possible. They don't need a this memory as well, because they automatically have it. So Michal, she had a certain stubbornness, a certain regality to her. So maybe she felt that she needed to keep herself in check. Again, it's machlokas whether the chacham agreed or disagreed, and maybe she stopped, maybe she didn't. So there's what to talk about. Okay, so Rav Tzadok says a couple of things. First of all, Rav Tzadok says that Michal was a tznuah, and she took after her father Shaul. He was a very tznius person. We know that he's even called the one who had to be grabbed, because when the Plagish Begiva, they promised they would never marry into the Klal Yisrael condemned the act that had happened there in Shevet Binyamin, that everybody let it get away with, and they said they would never give their daughters to Binyamin, and then they realized after the civil war was over and Binyamin was destroyed, there was only 300 men left, and the Shevet was going to be lost, so they said, all right, you could take our daughters. So that's where they had the machal, they had the circle, and they grabbed, and it says 300 men went out, and 299 of them took brides, but one didn't, and that was Shaul. Shaul was too embarrassed, and his wife actually, Bishag, what was her name? She was a tznuah, and she actually grabbed him. So she had a certain vivaciousness, which maybe Michal carried over. If that was daughter, I'm not sure. Somebody has to look that up in Tanakh. But anyway, the point is that Shaul was very shy and tznius, which is why he was zocha to melucha b'shvil tznius, the Gemara says. So Memela, when Michal saw that David was dancing Mecharchar b'chol kocho, she criticized him for it. But really, says Rav Tzadok, she was wrong. And so therefore she took the musar that she was wrong, and she realized that no, really David was doing it l'shem shemayim, so his going outward was also a good thing. And so Memela, in order to be misakin that, she put on tefillin. But I want to try to explain why tefillin specifically. So Rav Tzadok writes, and again, this is like from many other places, Rav Tzadok writes a very fascinating thing as well, that, like this, that what did Shaul do wrong? He didn't kill Agag. He let Amalek survive. Why? Because Shaul perverted his midah of tznius and his midah of chesed. He saw the good in everybody, and Shaul, which is a big mila, but he used it in the wrong place here, because Shaul saw that, oh look, the Bnei Banav Shalhaman are going to learn Torah in Bnei Brak, so Memela, I should leave them alive, and this extra Rahmanis, which kept them alive, is a shorish of Amalek in Klal Yisrael, says Rav Tzadok. And he says the whole tikkun came later when Mordechai and Esther finally got rid of him and took it out. Now, it's very fascinating that Mordechai and Esther have a connection to tefillin, right? Because the pasuk says like Yehudim Haisa Ora v'Simcha v'Sasim v'Yikar, and the Gemara darshans Yikar is tefillin. I just want to say that Yikar, Yud Kuf Reish, means splendor, beauty, has the same letters of Keri, which Keri obviously means Mikra Laila, but it's also Asher Karcha B'Derech, which is Amalek. So the Tumah is the opposite of the Yakar, and you find a lot of words are like this. Yad is hand, and Dai is enough. And there's a lot to say. Yad means to give generously, and Dai means to stop. And there's always balances. So Yakar, like Nega and Oneg, there's a lot of letters that contradict each other. There's a lot to say. I've collected about, 20 or 30 of them, and I have a friend who's collected a lot more. But there's a lot of words that are opposites like that. So Yakar and Keri are the beauty of man versus the destruction of man, and the kedusha is what happens, and so and Rav Tzadok says that really Shaul's melucha, which was Shaul, was borrowed, so that was really a introduction to Mashiach coming. So just like there's Mashiach ben Yosef, which is Yosef ben Binyamin, and so afterwards comes Mashiach ben David, and that's kind of what Michal was. She was the bridge between Mashiach ben Yosef, which was her father, who lost the Melucha, and then Michal came afterwards. And Agav, he also says, very interesting, that since Shaul was wrong in not killing Agag, basically, so therefore, what specifically killed Shaul? A Ger Amaleki is who killed him. I know it's Machalkes and Midrashim and Chazals, Mechilta, whether a Ger could convert an Amalek. There's some Shitas that say that they can. Some chooses to say they can't. It's a whole conversation in itself, whether they're accepted or not. Seemingly they're not. But the point is that someone who tried to convert, still the Amalek part killed them. So bring it all together. What's the kush? The kush is the darkness that was there that caused this behavior to take place. That's the carry, the asher karcha, that kept Amalek alive. And so therefore she was trying to fix that by putting on the tefillin. She was trying to be miyached that. Remember the Aruch HaShulchan brings down from the Zohar that is it tefillin to Rashi to Rabbeinu Tam. We know that Shalos Teshuvos Min HaShamayim has the Havayas together, which is tefillin to Rabbeinu Tam, and they say that's the tefillin you're supposed to wear. So what's the pshat? He says that based on the Zohar, when Mashiach comes, that's what we follow. Why? What does that mean? Havayas next to each other, right? Shema, Vayim Shema, Vayikiviyacha. And the parshas in the Shema. So what is the two Vahayas? It's where Vahaya Hashem L'melech. Hashem, there's a shlemus of Hashem that there's a Haya, whatever Hashem says, Misha Amar Vahaya Ha'olam, whatever Hashem says happens. And that is not Niskala in this world with the Kisei not being Shalim, which has to do with Amalek. So there's a lot of Ramuzim here that all need to be tied together. And Be'ezer Hashem, I look forward to hearing your ha'aros on it, but I hope that shed a little bit more light on this very, very fascinating topic. Thank you so much for joining.